Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be doing a bit of a follow up from last week's show, and we're going to dive in to how you can generate and send up to 4 or even more remote unique videos to return as returns to video guest using just one output in vMix and a little help from OBS. But before we get to that, as always, I welcome everybody. Please, if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything you want to share, please feel free to post them in the comments. We'll get to them here on the show. And also, if you would like to join us as a call-in guest, please, we have a URL. It's posted in the show notes and shown here below. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you on to talk with you. All right, so why don't we jump in and we'll really pick up with where we left off last week. And as a bit of a recap, last week when we looked at what we wanted to do, we focused on sending unique video back to a remote guest that you may be bringing into a production. And this meant that we had a few things. First, we never wanted the guest in whatever remote video you sent to see themselves, because that can sometimes be confusing because there's a bit of a time delay. The second was that we didn't want them to see duplicates of any other guest that may be shown as well. So we wanted to do something that really made it very simple and very focused for whatever the remote guest was seeing. And in this example, I mean, when we talked about it last week, we set it up for a single guest, but for this week, we actually extended that script and set that up to work with up to 4 guests now. So we won't be diving into the script, but that's something we'll actually put up on GitHub. So if you'd like to dig into that, that will be available to you. So one of the key things, though, that came up, and somebody actually asked it as a question right before the show ended last week, was vMix only has 4 outputs, and we're using one of those outputs for our program. So if you want more than 3 guests, what do you do? And this actually was something that we had planned as a follow-on, so it was a perfect lead-in question for this week. And this week, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking and compositing different outputs inside of vMix and using OBS to tear that composite apart and send them as individual feeds back to return guest using our live-to-air product. So as a visual for last week, if we switch over here, one of the things we had is, so this will be the return that a single guest will see. So let me do a few things here. I'm going to set this up, and we will turn around and say, this is the video that's coming out. And in it, we have guest 1, guest 2, and guest 3. And what we have here in the preview is the return video that guest 1 is seeing. So if I turn around and generate through our script what they would see, what you'll see here is they will see guest 2 and guest 3 because we wanted to be sure that they didn't see themselves. And they will see that there is also a guest 4 and a host, so they'll see those down here, but they won't show up. And then no matter what feed that we send over here into the program out, if I process it, you'll see that it's keeping to those rules. It's letting them see all the other guests that are in the production with them, let them see the host, and it lets them see what's going on here in the main window with if there's content or anything. So this is what we've done. We generated multiple video returns for these guests, each uniquely tailored to what they should optimally see. So when we generated these, so if you look here where we have this get with guest 1, 3, and a slide, what we have here is what guest 1 would see. But if I click now, this is what guest 2 would see. They would see guest 1 and guest 3, and they'd see guest 4 in the host, but not themselves. The return going to guest 3 because they are in this video coming in. It gets decomposed and they only see the slide and they see the other guests and the host. And guest 4 actually sees the same thing. They see what's coming out of program. They see guest 2, I believe here, and they see the host. So these are the things that we generated as individual inputs. And if you look, these are the inputs we have going right across here. Return 1, return 2, return 3, and return 4. But what you see next to it is actually the part where we want to dig into. So for this, in order to create individual videos, we didn't have enough outputs in vMix. So we were going to use just one, and we're going to create a composite. And this composite will be built using layers. So in our standard returns that we did last week, we used a layered framework that basically took all the different scenarios we had in mind and gave us layers that we could populate dynamically. And so for today, what we're doing is we're taking those layered inputs and layering them a second time into a composite. So actually somebody's saying they're having a little trouble hearing us. So hopefully, we'll tweak the audio up a bit and see if that helps. So, okay. So the way we did this, let me jump into this input specifically, is we set up and we took the layers for return 1 through return 4, and we put them into quadrants. So essentially that means we scaled them to half size and then position them to the different quadrants of the screen. So in this case, the upper left, and for 2, 3, and 4 is upper right, lower left, and lower right. So this was just a very standard type of layering. But there was one thing that, as we were doing this, we discovered. And that is layers only go too deep. So some of the things that we did inside of these original layers actually involved having another layer embedded in them. So we ended up having to go, and that other layer, by the way, was the program output, because sometimes the program out as an input had multiple layers, and we were just doing that directly in the scripts we published last week. So this week, after discovering that, what we ended up doing was we ended up taking program in, if you look down here, as an NDI feed. And this allows us now to basically flatten all those layers. And it essentially allows us to keep within that 2-layer deep rule inside of vMix for 2 layered inputs at a time. So we set that up, and that's just something to note because that is important. So when we set these layers up now, what we've done is let me get to the outputs here. We are setting that out. That's input 20 here. So we're sending that out of output 4 over NDI. And by sending that out, we're making it available to OBS. So before I switch there, I just want to make one note, and that is because we are working around a limitation in the number of outputs, this solution we're discussing here won't work with vMix call. vMix call, if you remember how it's set up, when you add a vMix call guest, you get to select what their return video is, but only by picking it as output 1 to output 4. And so, or none, which is another option if it's audio only. But this means that you're really limited to just having 3 configurable outputs for vMix call. This solution won't work to get you 4 and beyond. So let's jump over to OBS over here, and we'll take a look at what we're doing. And in OBS, we are creating a series of scenes. So if you remember the way OBS works, you have scenes, and inside each of those scenes is a source or multiple sources, and those sources are stacked like layers in vMix. But what we've done is we've taken this input, which has all 4 of the return videos in it, and I set that up in one scene so you could actually see what it looks like. But then I've created 4 additional scenes: return 1, return 2, return 3, and return 4, which take that one output we have from vMix with the 4 guest returns and carve them up. So each one of these, return 1 to return 4, has unique video in it, but it's carved up so that it's 960 by 540, so it's a quarter of the full 1080 video we sent out. But each one of these scenes now will be able to send out a unique video feed to remote guests. So let's just take a slightly closer look here. So if we look at return 1, we have the same input, this quad input return that we're sending out from vMix. And the first thing we need to do, if we go in there, is we're going to do a transform. And in the transform, we are taking the video that's coming in and we're cropping it down to taking the rightmost 960 and the topmost 540. So we're cropping, sorry, the leftmost 960 and the topmost 540. So we're cropping from the right and we're cropping from the bottom to get to where we want. And we're scaling this up to twice the size. So it's saying the size now is 3840 by 2160, which is exactly what you expect. We're taking a 1080 video, doubling it in size, and then cropping it down to just one quadrant of it. And we did that for each of these returns that we have set up, for each of these scenes, named return 1 to return 4. The other thing we have here is inside vMix, there is something called filters that you can apply. And so in these filters, one of the things you have available is a dedicated NDI output. And this is an incredibly powerful feature in everything that we have available to us in OBS. Because what it lets us do is create all these scenes with all individual NDI outs. And that's exactly what we did here. So we created a unique NDI feed with each with a unique name. So it comes back here and says, what NDI name do you want? And that's just return 01, which is how we send this out. So let's see now. So this is the same. So it's repeated for all 4 of these. And as you can see, I mean, none of this stuff is overly complicated. We're basically taking OBS, one input, split across 4 scenes, and we're carving it up and sending it out as NDI. And this is one of the brilliant things about NDI. It allows us basically to create a pipeline of processing outside of a single box. So even though we have one output coming out of vMix, that is seamlessly going into OBS through NDI, and NDI and vMix, I mean, OBS is now sending this out as 4 NDI feeds that we're now going to use as return videos using live to air. So this hopefully, sets the framework for what we have next. So let me jump here now. So we're doing this. So here we have a guest that's sitting, waiting to get into live to air. And we're going to be bringing this guest over here in as guest 1, then guest 2, guest 3, and guest 4. And you will see the different videos that they get, each one of these as it's generated. So first, if I go over to live to air, let me jump over here. I'm going to bring this guest first in as guest 1. So I select channel 1, click the guest, and I pick them up. So they're off air, the video's ramping up to speed. And now if I go on air, this guest now, if you look over here, is seeing the video that we have set up to go back to guest one. And the way we do this in live to air is pretty simple from a setup point of view. We have the ability in live to air to have individual unique guest inputs. And so all we've done here is we've taken and pulled out the inputs coming from OBS. So that's Alchemy Studios, the name of our computer here, and we're taking return 01, which we said was the NDI output for guest one. And we did that now for all of these guests. So each one is receiving different unique videos. But because we don't really want to do anything special with the audio, they can all get their own mix minus feeds. We, in our single input, which is where we normally send back the same video to everybody, we just set the video to disabled, but we kept the audio there. And that means that all of these guests can now receive an automated mix minus. So you only have to create one audio feed. And for that, we are just taking vMix bus A. So the way this would be set up in an actual production is that you would use vMix bus A to route all of the audio in the studio except the guest audio. So no guest audio would get onto bus A, and that would be returned to live to air, which would then create the individual mixes for each one of the guests. But because we are sending in the individual videos, they now will see something unique. And that means that they can each participate, hear each other, so have a full conversation, but still each be seeing something different that's related to their experience of the production. So if you look over here, this is how we set this up for guest one. And if I change things in vMix, so let me just, we'll go to different things here. And you can see that in this case, this is just another slide setup we have. And if I cut another video, so all of these will change and adapt uniquely for guest one. But now, if I were to go in and let me drop this guest out of channel one, and I'm going to send them now to come in as guest two. So when I pick them up as guest two, you'll see now that they have something different. They are now seeing me as guest one over here. And, oh, sorry, make sure we did all this. So we are getting now different things for each one of these guests. And if I drop through all of these, you'll see that selecting guest three, so I think I must have mixed something up here in what I did, but that's not important. So, but you can see that each one of these guests is now getting something different coming into them as we drop them and add them. So basically, the goal here was to just show that even though you have certain limitations in one tool like vMix, where you can only send out 4 total outputs, there are ways using NDI in a broader workflow to get around some of those limitations and to potentially process things in different ways downstream using NDI and other tools you have. It doesn't just have to be things like OBS. So I know this was a slightly shorter show than we typically have, but hopefully you found this useful and it makes sense sort of coming off of what we covered last week with building the individual outputs uniquely for each guest. So hopefully these fit together nicely as a pair of shows that cover the topic. So what we'll do now is we'll end the show and jump into the post show. So please, we welcome you to hang around. But if you can't, we will definitely see you all next week. But if you can, we'd love to have a discussion with you in post show. Take care, everyone. So Hello, everyone. Welcome to the post show. So, we have a few people that joined us, so I want to make sure we get to everybody. So, we have Shop BC, we have Shakant. Hopefully, I said your name right. Shakant, thank you for joining us. We have Peter from Berlin. Peter, always good to see you. Uh, I we have I apologize. It's in Cyrillic, so I am sure I will not pronounce it correctly. But you said thank you for your stream, so thank you for joining us, and I apologize that I can't do your name justice. Uh, and so let me start by saying ShopBC just asked a question here, and he said, "Does live to air have enough bandwidth for 4 NDI outputs?" And 4+ NDI inputs with guest returns? And the answer is yes. And there's a couple of points to make in this. The first is that NDI as a bandwidth uh, consumer, what you send from a system is distinct from what you receive from a system. So that's the first thing. So sending 4 outputs and receiving 4 inputs over NDI, they don't impact each other. So network connections are they're symmetrical or asymmetrical. Whatever's going on the outputs has no impact on what's coming in on the inputs. And that's true for switches as well. So when you think about NDI bandwidth utilization, you think about it from one box and to another box. And in a switch, that's the only way you need to really consider it. So at 1080, that means you can have one box with a 1 gigabit connection send somewhere around 6 to 7 1080p signals out that box. And another box with just a 1 gig connection can receive up between 6 and 7 1080p signals. So you're pretty much equal on that front. But that doesn't mean that you can't have other boxes on that same switch talking NDI. So you aren't consuming all the bandwidth on the switch. You're just consuming the bandwidth on that connection in one direction. So if you had 6 NDI feeds going from box A to box B can still send back more NDI feeds out back to box A. So it could send 6, 7 feeds in reverse. So you have these things, when you start to think about bandwidth and NDI, that's very important to keep in mind. So you can have a studio with a 1 gig network that still has dozens of high resolution, even hundreds of high resolution NDI feeds running across the switch. And that's really just the backbone bandwidth of the switch. And most switches today can handle pretty much everything you're going to want to handle. So let's see. Yeah. So yeah, he was ShopBC was clarifying that with a with saying with the 1 gigabyte. So yes. So this is fine, and we have people that do this all the time. And it's also possible to mix 1 gig and 10 gig devices. So you could have, for instance, we have people using multiple live to air systems with, working with more than 4 guests. And what they would have on their switcher is a 10 gig switch and 10 gig ports on their vMix or TriCaster, but there's still 1 gig ports on live to air, and you can have multiple live to air systems talk to that one 10 gig switch because the bandwidth is higher there. And having these types of conversations doesn't ratchet that down or limit it in any way. So you end up having the full 10 gig on the switch side, though each box talking to it may only have 1 gig. And there's no issues with that as either. So that's hopefully clarifies that. So let's see. So Crown Point, thank you very much. Crown Point just said that this has helped. This show has helped change his vMix productions, and we're glad. I mean, I think even though we cover some very specific topics here, we really are focused more on the concepts around them, not necessarily that you're going to want to implement individual videos back to guests, but the fact that you can manipulate videos this way based on what's going on. So that's really the point, how NDI can open the flow. So a lot of these things, hopefully you take away more than just the subject that we're talking about, but more of the underlying concepts that hopefully motivate what we're doing with the topics. So again, I'm going to throw out a request. Anybody that has any questions, get them in, because I know the comments come in a little behind, a little out of real time. So I don't want to cut off the after show too early. But while you're getting any questions you have ready, I want to mention there was two other ways that we had looked at that we could have solved this problem beyond using the output, the one output inside of vMix. And that is, first, vMix has something called full screen mode. And what full screen will do is it will let you send out a full resolution video out one of the ports on your graphic cards. And you can say which video, which input, which output do I want to monitor and send out that full screen port on my graphics card. So one of the other ways that we thought of doing this would be to send out a HDMI signal into an NDI converter and send that into OBS to break apart. And one of the advantages that would have given us is that we could have kept all four of the outputs free, and they could be used for general NDI things that we'd want to do and switch as we saw fit. So that was one approach that we thought about. And the other approach was to use the external outputs. Now, inside vMix, you do have the ability to route video, in the case of 4K and Pro, up to two external devices, which could be things like decklink cards or other types of hardware you may have. And that would have given us a similar option where if we routed it out that way, we could take it in either as a another SDI signal and route that into OBS, or also with another converter. So that was something that, as we were thinking of different ways to do this, we saw those as options, especially if people needed to keep the four outputs available. And the other option for that, with both of those, would be that if you needed just four, you could use that approach as the fourth. So you could route the returns we had set up for guests 1 to 3 to outputs 2 to 4, because you're using output 1 for program, and then route that fourth return out one of these other mechanisms, or using both, you could even do sort of 5 or 6 returns with using all of them together. So a couple of different ways to handle the same general challenge. But again, this was really more of a demonstration of what you could do with NDI and OBS as part of a pipeline. So it looks like we don't have any other questions. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us and for sticking around for the after show. We will be back here next week, same time and same social channels here. And we look forward to having all of you join us. Thanks, everyone. Take care.